fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Oh, welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Got Mr. Michael Hawley co-hosting today.
Right.
Yeah.
Mike the Ripper Hawley.
Mike the Ripper Hawley. Yeah. He's ripping away. Yeah. I keep saying, I just got noticed that on online that some group that followed me, and they've got 5 new books out, and they're small books, but they claim they have the answer to the Jack the Ripper.
Of course, that's why I enjoy discussing that stuff, especially the DNA BS that they had recently too. So
yeah,
but I enjoy that. Keeps it going. How's that?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it keeps it going and keeps people talking. But I think it's a little bit too far gone myself to get DNA and things like that, but you never know.
Oh, it is.
What do I know? But well, speaking of DNA, we're going to be talking with a writer, and he's actually the current District Attorney of Sacramento. Just was elected in 2022, and he's got a book out about a case that he was working on, and it's called "The People versus the Golden State Killer." Thien Ho, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on your show. It's a true honor, and looking forward to a great conversation about the people versus the Golden State Killer.
Oh, yeah. Do you have 2 hours? Because this is going to be a good
one. No. Hey, listen. So Thien, when we talk about this, now this took a lot of people by surprise when this case hit the news again, and that they had solved it, so to speak. They had actually had some sort of a DNA breakthrough, and this whole thing. So this took a lot of people by surprise. Tell us, where were you at the time when all this was going on, and were you working in the case before, or was it cold? How did it go, and where did you pick up with the case?
So I've been a prosecutor for over 25 years. At the time, I was assigned to the homicide team at the Sacramento DA's office, but in 2018. But you got to take a step back. 6 years before that, I tried my very first homicide case. The body of Rajneet Singh was found behind a brick wall in Rancho Cordova in the drizzling rain on a New Year day. And I prosecuted that murder case. And as I was getting ready for trial, I went out to the crime scene in Rancho Cordova with the lead detective and my buddy Billy, who was another homicide prosecutor. And lo and behold, I'm driving out there, and I look around, and I see nothing but bars on every window and every door in Rancho Cordova. And I said, why does everybody have bars everywhere? And they said, that's because of the ear. I said, the ear? Who's the ear? And that's when they said the East Area Rapist. And they told me about the crimes that he committed in the area, and I was just floored by it. And I said, you know what? Is he still alive? And they both said they thought he was dead. And in fact, the detective said, hey, I'm on a task force right now trying to find him, but I think he's dead. I said, well, if you ever find him, that's the one case I'm going to ask for. Fast forward 6 years later, I'm in homicide, and I find out that they arrested him, and they were about to prosecute him, and that's the one case that I've ever wanted to ask for. So I asked for it. I had the experience in the background, and I got assigned the case, and it was, off to the races at that point.
That's Joseph DeAngelo, right? He's the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but he was a cop when he was younger, back in those days when a lot of the crimes were going on. So nobody at the time picked up on him, or was it because he was inside the case or he was inside the police and he was working around stuff like that? Why do you think he was able to evade for so long?
Great question. The FBI during the crime spree and even afterwards, they compiled 2 separate profiles of the East Area Rapist, the original Nightstalker, the original Nightstalker, and the Golden State Killer. In both profiles, the analysis was that he was either law enforcement or military. The fact of the matter is, and they were absolutely right, the FBI was right, he was able to evade capture. Now, understand this, he committed 13 known murders, upwards of 50 sexual assaults. 120 burglaries in 11 different jurisdictions, counties in California, over a 12-year time span. I mean, he was prolific in terms of the geography of his crimes, and he didn't get caught. And I think part of it was because he was a cop during most of the crime spree. So he had inside knowledge. He would know, for example, how long it would take the police to arrive on scene. He would know all the ingress and egress, all the locations where they would, stop people and block cars coming in and out. And so with that, he had an advantage. He had inside information. And the craziest part of it is, so the first series of crimes happened in Visalia, which is a little town in the central part of California. It's the breadbasket, right? It's where most of the agriculture is in the state of California. There were 120 burglaries in a 3-mile square radius from 1974 to 1975. In the last incident, they had a stakeout, and the officer from the Visalia Police Department, Officer McGowan, confronted the ransacker inside a garage and gave chase, and at one point saw the actual face of the ransacker. And later, after the ransacker escaped because he shot at the officer, everybody asked the officer, Bill McGowan, hey, you saw his face. What did he look like? Officer McGowan said, I can't put a name, but his face looked familiar. Well, lo and behold, at that time, Joseph DeAngelo, who turned out to be the Visalia Ransacker, the Golden State Killer, was a police officer 20 minutes away. He was on the task force to help to find the ransacker, and he was the ransacker. That's how crazy it was. And I think he avoided capture partly because of that. And then the other thing was because all these different departments were siloed. Nope. Sacramento didn't talk to Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara didn't talk to Orange County. In this day and age, there's no way he could have committed the scope of these crimes.
So that's changed a lot. The police, they're more connected now, the police departments.
Yeah, absolutely. They're more connected. Plus, everybody's got a Ring camera. Everybody's got surveillance cameras. We have license plate readers. And you know what people carry around in their pockets all the time? A cell phone. And so in this day and age, I don't believe he could have committed all of these crimes over the geographical scope and get away with it. But he could back in 1974 to 1986.
Did he ever have any patterns of being a predator, as they call it, or a pattern of being a murderer? Did people ever pick up on that? And was he ever questioned back then?
He himself was never questioned. And in fact, we went through all of the reports after we found him. He never showed up anywhere on anybody's radar. That was the insane part of it. Not a single suspect list. We had tens of thousands of people, but his name showed up. He flew completely under the radar. Now, he had a very distinct MO. When he was committing his crimes up in Sacramento, was known as the East Area Rapist, the public information officer for the sheriff's department says, he's just targeting women that are home by themselves. So immediately he switched. He started targeting couples in homes. He would break into the homes, and what he would do is, 1 o'clock in the morning, he'd shine a flashlight and hold a gun and says, look, I live in a van down by the river. I'm just here for drugs and money. He'd have the wife tie up the husband. He'd tie up the wife. Then he would ransack through the homes, eating their food, drinking their beer. Then he would separate the wife in another room, tie her up. He'd come back to the husband, make him get on all fours, put a blanket over him and stack plates and cups and glasses on his back and says, look, if I hear anything break, I'll kill everybody in the house. And then he would sexually assault the wife. And when he left, he'd take a single earring and leave the other one behind. He'd take the wedding band. Now, in the ransacking series, he often took one earring and left the other one behind. And so that was his MO that was very consistent in Northern California. But he began to evolve, as a predator as time went on. But that was his classic MO.
Like power. He's got power over these people.
Absolutely. It was all, he had a God complex is really what it was when you strip away the mask and you look at the monster behind the mask.
You were talking about that one officer that saw his face, said he looked familiar. Was it because he saw him before, or did he look like maybe, someone familiar?
I think it was because he saw him before. So DeAngelo was, working as a police officer in the town of Exeter, 20 minutes away from where all the ransacking stuff. And there was a task force regionally to find the ransacker, and from time to time, DeAngelo was helping to find the ransacker out. So probably Officer McGowan, the officer, probably saw his face at some point and recognized it, but didn't see him enough to know who he was. And right after his face was seen, DeAngelo, he left that police department, transferred up to another police department about maybe half an hour away from Sacramento. And that's when the rapes happened in Sacramento.
Eventually he gets caught, but this is years later, of course. Much older. He's not a cop anymore. He's retired from that. What was the exact detail? Like, how did he get caught or discovered to be these three series of killers?
So he didn't retire as a police officer. He was fired as a police officer in 1979 for petty theft, stealing a hammer and dog repellent. And then after that happened, he began his crime sprees in Southern California, the murders and the rapes down there, because now he was just unmoored and unanchored and unhinged, even more so. But the way he was caught was my colleague, who was a criminalist and a cold case investigator out of Contra Costa County up near the Bay Area in California, Paul Hose. He came up with an idea, and it was brilliant. So for years, we took the crime scene DNA and uploaded into CODIS, the national database of DNA repository that's managed by the FBI. But nothing came up. There was no hit because he'd never been in the system before, right? But what Paul came up was, he had an idea to go get some crime scene DNA. And there was a whole adventure about how we found that crime scene DNA. But we ended up converted into a special profile. So have either one of you ever used 23andMe, Ancestry.com, any of those genealogy databases?
Family tree DNA.
Yes, family tree, yes.
That's what
you use. So what happens is you take that little buccal swab in your cheek and you send it in. And the genealogy company will convert your DNA to what they call a SNP profile, SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism. It measures 1 million different areas in your chromosome. It uploads that profile into their database and compares you to everybody else in there. And the more places you have in common with somebody, the more closely related you are. So we took his DNA, his semen from one of the crime scene from a rape kit. We converted into a SNP profile, and then we uploaded into the database. And when we did that, we came back that he was related, the killer, to a distant cousin. So now what we did was we had to build this family tree. Okay, this distant cousin. Do they have any brothers or sisters? Do they have who are their parents, their grandparents, their uncles and aunties and great-grandparents? So you build this massive family tree back to the common ancestor and down to the suspect. Now, we had over 1,000 names on this family tree, okay? But now we had to go through and sift through it. How many were male? How many had blue eyes? How many lived in Sacramento, in Contra Costa, in Orange County, in Ventura? How many were cops or ex-military? And so off of that list of 1,000, we narrowed it down to 3. He was one of them. And so ex-military, ex-cop. So on the day that he put out his trash, we lined up this garbage truck with plastic. We took one of our detectives, put him in a uniform of a garbage truck driver, drove up, picked up his trash, dumped it in the garbage can, and we tested 8 items from his can. And the last item we tested was a piece of tissue, and the DNA in that tissue came back to all the rapes, murders in SoCal. We had our killer.
Well, that family DNA stuff that's so on every documentary now started with Paul.
Yes. Paul came up with the idea, but he was part of a team of investigators from my office, and it was an investigative assistant who never likes any public attention. Her name is Monica. Monica was going through all these names, did all the research, and she sent that email and says, you know what? I think this guy may be it. So Paul came up with the idea, but he was on his way out with retirement. And it was Monica who's sifting through all the data. She's a savant when it comes to that. Sent an email, says, I think this guy may be it. And that's what kept the ball rolling.
That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you set up and you did the arrest, how did he respond to that, the initial arrest?
So, we were following him around because you want to do surveillance, collecting more DNA. You want to follow him around, see what he's doing. He had guns in his house. So we had a fugitive apprehension team. We nicknamed them the body snatchers. The body snatchers, their job is just to go find people and to arrest them and take them in custody. So we had a whole team that day that we're going to take them down. The FBI, our crime lab people, a bunch of CSI people, and other detectives were all nearby staging at a local supermarket parking lot. And the body snatchers are watching him. And he all of a sudden, we're worried about where we're going to go in the house because he has guns. So he comes out, right? And he's walking in his front yard doing some yard work. And there's this huge debate. All right, how are we going to take him down? Is he going to retreat into the house, grab his gun? Is he going to take a cyanide pill? What is he going to do? So while everybody's debating, the sergeant of the body snatcher, the head body snatcher, and he's a guy that is out of central casting. He looks like a cowboy, a good old boy, right? With cowboy boots, the whole bit. And he's like a bull in a china cabinet. He says, the hell with this, enough of this debate. He jumps out of his truck. He starts just walking down right towards DeAngelo. And he walks up to him, and everybody's looking at, and he just says, hey, you know where, in mid-sentence, he grabs DeAngelo by the neck and the collar, takes him to the ground, and arrests him. Just snatches him up. DeAngelo is being thrown in the back of a minivan. He's like, he doesn't know what's going on, and all he could muster was this faint little voice. I got a pot roast in the oven. I got a pot roast in the oven. And that's all he could barely say as he was being hauled away, into the interrogation room.
When he got arrested and all that, did he deny everything, or or did he talk to the police? What did he do at that first time?
So this is one of the new things that I cover in the book that has never really been talked about. And obviously the book, as the lead prosecutor and as somebody who has access and knew about everything involving the case, there are hundreds of new facts in there, but one of them is the interrogation. So they put him in the interrogation room, and, he's wearing cargo shorts and tube socks and a t-shirt. He looks like, your alcoholic uncle, at a Thanksgiving dinner. So they put him in the interrogation room, and this is a classic technique, right? They let him sit there for an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, without anybody really coming in and talking to him at length. And part of why we do this, and sometimes you'll see suspects, they just start falling asleep, or they'll sit there and we let them sit and stew in their own juices, right? Thinking about, why did I get arrested? What do they have on me? What do they know? What do they don't know? Right? And so we let them do that. And after about 2 hours, they came in. They confronted him, okay, with the crimes that happened in Sacramento, Ventura, and a number of places. And first, all he says was, I don't remember. And sometimes he just sits there without even responding, like he's in a comatose state. The video of his interrogation, at some point when he's sitting in the room, I thought the video had paused. But it was him just sitting completely motionless for like up to half an hour. You could barely tell that he was breathing. But the key was when he was sitting in the room, in the interrogation room, he started mumbling to himself. And he started trying to set up this mental defense. And what he did was he blamed the crime on a split personality. Jerry made me do it. Jerry forced me to do it. I didn't want to do it. I pushed him away, but he made me do it, right? I did all those things. So he admitted to committing the crimes, but he blamed it on a split personality. In the law, they called that a dissociative identity disorder, right? Now, the problem for him was he didn't know the law. What he admitted to didn't establish a mental defense. But the other thing was this was all bogus. And the reason why we knew it was bogus, remember I told you guys that he'd been arrested for petty theft back in 1979? But what happened was, when he was arrested there, he fought with the store security. And then he literally, after he fought with, he pretended to act crazy. He was mumbling crazy stuff to himself. And in fact, as part of that crazy kind of, he even used the language, defecated in his own pants while he was being held down. When the police showed up, he told them that he was just pretending to be crazy in hopes that they wouldn't call the police. So here's an example of him pretending to malinger craziness when he was cornered and caught. And so fast forward 40 years later, 2018, he was doing the same
Now, he brought that right into the courtroom, too, when you guys were trying him. He was acting real frail, and didn't he, if I remember right, and they brought him in a wheelchair and the whole thing, and he was acting like he was about to die any time.
There, when he was interrogated, and then right when they put him in the booking room, he put his head down and he rammed his head against the wall. This was in the booking room. So when you look at the booking photo that's released out there, on the top of his head, what you'll notice is red. It's blood. We were worried that he was going to kill himself. So they put him in a cell in the Sacramento jail that had a camera inside the cell. There's only 3 cells in the jail that has a camera in it. One was for an ISIS bomber. Another was for the Unabomber. And the third was for the Golden State Killer. And so, you know how he's acting crazy, like he's out of it and he's almost barely comatose and barely with it in the courtroom? Well, I have video of him. And it's just like in The Usual Suspect, right outside the police station. He's walking into his cell with a cane, hobbling. The moment the door closes, he puts the cane down, he's doing jumping jacks, he's climbing up and down his bunk bed, perfectly fine. He is just the master manipulator.
Do you think he was making that, beating his head so people would see the scar on his head and, law enforcement did that to me, and then getting sympathy?
Yeah, I think that was all part of the act, part of the play, acting crazy, acting, like he was in 1979 when he was arrested. It's the act, right? Because he was trying to set up a mental defense. He was constantly trying to manipulate people.
What did you think of him then? I mean, because he's putting on these shows. He's done this for a long time, so he's obviously pretty smart. But he also had a family, right? He had a wife and the whole thing. So did nobody else ever pick up on him or any of his behaviors, or were they totally unaware of everything?
It's interesting. So once we arrested him, we poured over his entire life from the moment he was born in Bath, New York, to when he was, arrested. We interviewed his wife, his kids, his brother-in-law, like everybody. And what I can tell you is I don't think that his wife knew that he was a serial killer. You might be thinking, well, how is that? Well, first of all, when they were married, they lived completely separate lives under the same roof. He was going to law school. He was a cop. They slept in different bedrooms. They had different schedules. And frankly, his wife, who we interviewed, is very self-centered and very narcissistic and so focused on herself that she probably wasn't aware of what he was doing or where he was going. And then when he started to have kids, that's when the crimes became less frequent. And his last known murder was 1986 after the birth of his second child. And he was able to compartmentalize a lot of his life, right? And so I don't think they knew per se that he was a serial killer, even though I'm, looking back, there were things that I think they recognized after the fact. Like, for example, his ex-wife, after he was arrested, and mind you, he separated from him in 1989. And, they lived apart and didn't finalize the divorce until after he was arrested. But she did remember that at one point she found a series of pre-tied shoelaces that he was hiding underneath one of the bathroom sinks. And a lot of the crime scenes had pre-tied shoelaces because he would bring these shoelaces and he would just cinch them really quickly to tie his victims up. And so that was something that she found later, and we were able to connect that to him.
I've noticed, like, in this book, you tend to focus more about victims and survivors than actually on the killer himself.
The very first main book written, popular book about the East Area Rapist was Michelle McNamara. She wrote a book called I'll Be Gone in the Dark, right? And so when she wrote that book, she focused on the crime and on the criminal. And obviously she passed away before we caught him, so that's where her focus was. My colleague and friend Paul Holes wrote his book, but it was focused on the investigative technique and some of the other cases that he worked on. So my case is the third, what I call the third in the trilogy, right? It covers the investigation, the capture, and the prosecution. But I wanted to make sure that we were also focusing on the generation of law enforcement officers that never gave up, the search for him, and then also focus on the victims and the survivors to make sure that their voices are amplified and how they turn tragedy into triumph. And so that became a focus of the book.
How has this process changed you? Like going through the part of writing the book and going through all the facts again and kind of going through the story and telling it in a book. Do you think it's had an effect on you personally?
Absolutely. So I've never written a book before, and part of what I talk about in the book is I was born in Vietnam. My family and I escaped Vietnam on a fishing boat. I spent 6 months in a refugee camp, so I'm a political refugee. And when I came to this country, I couldn't even speak English or understand it. I learned how to speak English by watching Bugs Bunny cartoons, right? So 20 years later, graduated from law school. I never thought I'd be a lawyer, never thought I'd be a trial lawyer, much less a district attorney, much less published author. And so all I knew was, how do I approach writing this book? So I wrote a very detailed outline, 30 pages of the book. And then every morning for 7 months, I'd wake up at 5 o'clock, I'd sit down and I'd spend 2 hours writing the book, right? Send it back to my editor, he sent it back to me, we revised it, worked on it. But in the process of it, I went back and talked to several of the victims. And it really reminded me of the resiliency of the human spirit, right? It reminded me of the power. So one of the victims, Chris was victim number 10. She was only 15 at the time that she was sexually assaulted. And she went through periods of drug abuse, alcoholism, failed relationships. But through the process of this case, when we found him, arrested him, and ultimately prosecuted him, she was involved in making sure that she was a voice for herself and for other victims. And she found her calling in terms of now supporting, a survivor supporting other survivors. And so it just really reminded me of the resiliency of the human spirit as I wrote the book.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, that these really serious crimes and these awful people like that do these sort of crimes. It's still amazing to me how they become almost a celebrity. You know what I mean? And yet the victims and the people that get hurt and the survivors and all that stuff seem to just get ignored. Or it just it passes by. All of a sudden, they're some celebrity, and it's always surprised me. But that's just the nature of things, I guess.
Even with that town of that town that has all the bars on it.
Yeah, Rancho.
That affected the whole community.
Mm-hmm. It did, and I think it's just our prurient nature in terms of we're attracted to those things, and the darkness of it. But really, that's why, in the true crime genre, I'm trying to shift the focus here on the resiliency of the human spirit, on the survivors, and on the law enforcement. And then, I provide details about the prosecution of the case that has never been revealed publicly as well, and just give people insight, pulling back the curtain, right, and giving people that insight into it and going into it. And so that's the hope of, People versus the Golden State Killer.
And the press gets a lot of things wrong, speaking for them, I'll say that. Is there something that they constantly got wrong that really bothered you? Was there something that you heard about the case quite often that you kind of thought, well, that's not true, or no, that's not right? Is there anything in particular that was used incorrectly? The media on this case are very well informed because there's so much on it, right? And there was so much interest in these 11 different jurisdictions, right? I mean, that's unheard of where you get prosecutors from 6 different counties coming together. So I think the media paid careful attention. They double-checked stuff. But there were just things that were never released to the media. Because we just kept that in because we were prosecuting the case. And when the case was over, it's been 5 years, things that were never discussed. And part of writing the book is to bring some of that to light and show the amazing work that was done behind the scenes. And how's old DeAngelo doing in prison now?
What I can tell you is that he's currently in prison in the Central Valley in California. He's doing multiple life without the possibility of parole sentences. We call that LWOP here in California. and he is in the protective needs unit. So that's the unit that houses child molesters, rapists, and snitches, because if you put them in the general population of G-pop, as we call it, they're going to get killed. And so DeAngelo is constantly looking over his shoulder, terrified that he is going to get attacked. But he does work in the cafeteria, and I do periodically receive updates about him. He's 79 at this time, but he's constantly looking at over his shoulder, living in his own private hell where he belongs.
The other thing that always interests me and others, especially with your book here, is how to understand these strange serial offenders that lack complete remorse. And one of the things that we talk about with this kind of research is, where was the trigger in his life? You know, let's say he was a bad egg. He was born that way, lacked remorse, but there's that point. And did you ever try to figure that out, or when his first murder was, or anything like this?
Most definitely. So, there's a whole chapter in the book. It's titled the Monster Behind the Mask, and we peel back the mask. And so one of the triggering points in his life is when he was about 9 or 10 years old, he witnessed his younger sister getting raped by military personnel on a military base overseas.
That Connie, that's the sister Connie?
Yes, that's Sister Connie. And he was held down while his sister was being sexually assaulted. And his parents abused him. And as he grew older, he abused animals. That's not a surprise when it comes to serial killers. And so really when we looked at it, he had this issue with control and power. He felt so powerless in his own life, from an emotional, physical standpoint. The other thing was a number of the victims described their assailant as having an extremely small micro penis. And when we arrested him, we executed a search warrant, and I argued it in court, where we went in and we took pictures of his penis, and lo and behold, he had a micro penis. And so he felt that he lacked power, that he lacked strength in his own personal life and control in his own personal life, whether it was emotionally, mentally, or physically. And so here he was. He had this God complex. He became a police officer, right, enforcing the law over other people, but the law didn't apply to him. He would break into people's home. He would lord over them, drinking their beer and eating their food. It became his home. He would tie them up. He would put them on all fours and stack plates on them. He would sexually assault them, and then he would take the wedding band or an earring, and he would look at them and decide whether he was going to kill them or not. And in the later stages, he would bludgeon them to death. He held their life in the palm of his hand. He was hunting people rather than hunting deer or elk. So he had this God complex over him, and that's what really made it a compulsion for him. But he had choices to make, and those were the choices that he made.
Speaking of micro penises, and not a joke, but the suspect that I researched, my Jack the Ripper suspect is Francis Tumblety. He had a micro penis.
Really?
And it's like, ooh, there's a connection here. I'm going to start some more research. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So there is, definitely might be a connection there, in terms of the testosterone level that he did not have, growing up or whatever, and then just the nature of it. But I mean, that affected him, I think, psychologically. And so if you peel back these layers, I think that's ultimately what was involved here.
Okay, so let's talk about where people find the book, where they find you. Do you have social media? Are you set up to take questions from people or anything like that? Are you out there, or do you stay private? Where do they find Thien?
So first of all, they can buy the book, and you can buy it on Amazon, but I really encourage people to go to my website, because it will connect them to local retailers, because we want to support our local businesses. So they can go to thienho.org. That's THIENHO.org, and it'll take you to a link where you can buy it and order it. In fact, the book is released tomorrow, but people have been pre-ordering it. It's been arriving. I'm doing a series of book signings. So I'm doing a book signing Wednesday at the downtown library in Sacramento. I have another book signing event this coming Friday. So this coming Friday, the 14th of November at 3 p.m. I'll be at the downtown main library in Los Angeles. 3 p.m. I'll be there with the LA District Attorney. We're going to do a fireside chat, talk about the case, and I'll be there for a book signing. But if they go to the website, they'll see it. They can also check me out on Instagram. and that's at Thien Ho, that's THIEN _official. So Thien Ho _official. And I'll be coming to a town near you in the future.
Well, there you have it. We'll have all that up on our website so people can find it easily and maybe come out and see you and get a book signed. And we appreciate you being here. And what can I say? So, what are you working on now? Are you doing another book, or is this it? Or are you just going back to prosecuting?
Well, my day job, I run an office of 500 employees, nearly 200 prosecutors. We prosecute about 17,000 cases a year, so it's a pretty busy job there. This is my first true crime memoir, but I am looking right now. I've been contacted to maybe start a second book, but I'm not ready to do that just yet. We're also, in discussions, with different possibilities on this book regarding, whether you have a docuseries or you have a scripted series. So we're exploring all those options as well to really amplify the story that's being told here.
Yeah, be a good one.
Nice.
Be a good one. Well, again, we appreciate everything. And the book, everyone, The People versus the Golden State Killer. And the author who's been our guest is Thien Ho. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Well, great speaking with you.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.